Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of The Growth Show. I am delighted to welcome this time round Mr. Richard Glynn, former chief execs of Sporting Index, Ladbrookes, and a whole plethora of other things that he's going to talk to us about this afternoon. I'm actually pretty excited about this one. I mean, we had Tommy Evans, so it was the last one that was on, Richard, so some big boots to fill. But I am very excited. So thank you very much for coming on, and welcome to The Growth Show.
Well, Ollie, thank you very much, and you're already setting the bar massively high. So yet again, this will be another one of my massive failures in life. So I won't be able to fill the boots, and that'll be it. I'll start the way I mean to continue.
Okay, well, brilliant. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for coming on to The Growth Show. Excellent. There we go. Rich, I thought just for everyone that's all our listeners that are listening to us, just to give everyone a bit of a background as to who Richard Glynn is, your journey to today, and all the rest of it.
Principally, who he is a fellow with a long-standing family and 3 kids who form the centre of everything I do. How I got here is that wonderful unknown path. I mean, I certainly never set out to get where I am, and doors opened, and the question is, some of them I should have walked through, I didn't, and others that I did, I probably shouldn't have done. But started in a wonderful, loving family in the middle of Leeds. I was terribly lucky to be scholarshiped through education when the grammar school went from being free to independent, and we'll come back and talk about this later, Ollie, but that's where I had learned this first absolute passion about paying back, about everything is about when you can, you give back. Look, I did all the normal stuff, Oxford, London Business School, all that sort of stuff, and started life as a corporate lawyer, but could never see myself as a lawyer, even though I became a partner, and that was very lucky, because to be honest, the other partners and most of my clients couldn't see me as a lawyer either, and so I stepped out and went into business. Had a series of incredible mentors, and found my absolute love in life was working with teams, particularly teams that perhaps could do better, and businesses that could do better, to see if we as a unit could turn them. And I think the overriding message that always came out was, if we could all look at ourselves in the faces and we could say we tried absolutely everything, and look, you're the rugby player, and quite an exceptional one, but that old Aussie phrase, never leaving anything on the paddock. If we could all look at ourselves and just say that, then sometimes actually others were just better than us. But then you could walk away, and so that's where I got to working with some incredible teams and having the chance to try and turn them around.
I mean, it's quite an interesting sort of philosophy, if you like, that you've got, which I think is commendable. But where would you say that how do you think that sort of developed over time? Was it just as a young kid you loved working in teams and with people, and realized that was your sort of direction of travel, or were you as a young lad going through education, Oxford, single-minded, focused on your own career path, and you realized that later on in your development? How did that evolve for you?
It's a really fascinating question, because as you progress through business, you take a load of these sort of psychological assessments, and you all have done them, team building, and all the different
insights profiles and Myers-Briggs,
absolutely, all of those. And the fabulous thing is that as you get older, you realize that actually your perception of yourself is fundamentally different to what others see you. So I've always sort of regarded myself as incredibly approachable, as fun-loving, as a really good listener, and it's quite staggering, actually, quite how opposite it comes out in these psychological assessments. Terribly intense, very driven, focused, and all this, and so. Once you do that, and I did that for the first time when I was sort of mid-20s at business school, it's that journey, that learning, realizing that absolutely everything that happens, in particular all the kicks that you get, if you can keep on learning and having that 100% learning culture all the time, particularly from failures, that's when you can really work with teams. And if you can apply that philosophy to yourself primarily, so every time you fail, you really try to learn from it, but also genuinely apply that with your teams, even when you know that people are just not doing what you want them to. If you can turn that from a negative into a real listening and a positive and a learning, then it becomes the most exciting job in the world working with teams. I'm afraid to say that I'm still learning. I'm by no means a finished article on it, and I still have to challenge myself all the time to listen better.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the key sort of developments or key failings, and also one of the key attributes of the best leaders or the worst leaders in organisations, whether that's in sport or in business or whatever, is the art of listening, and equally the art of self-awareness. So two things I wanted to sort of pick up on that one is, first one is the sort of self-awareness piece, because typically what you see in lots of successful people is they're fairly driven and focused on the direction of travel that they want to get to. When they get there, the actual outcome is that they need to have a total role reversal of not be single-minded anymore. They need to be a lot more holistic in their thought process and a lot more considerate towards others, and equally a lot more self-aware of their own behavior and the impacts of those behaviors. So how did you, I mean, I don't know if that's typical of your journey or route to becoming chief executive of a major FTSE company in Ladbrookes, for example, but how did that play out for you in terms of your self-awareness journey, if you like?
Yeah, I've always been incredibly self-aware of having imposter syndrome, of really never feeling good enough, and it really has always been there and still sits with me every single day. And I know a lot of chief executives do feel that imposter syndrome. And then when you get the privilege of running an organization, what I always used to say, even in the hardest times, is nobody puts a gun to your head and says, you must be chief exec of Ladbrokes. It is an absolute privilege to be there. You are simply the guardian of a seat. And if you ever believe you're anything more than just the guardian of that seat for a few years, then the hubris starts to take over. And there was a real learning for me, which was when you're in medium-sized businesses and you can put your arms around people and you can really understand every essence of every bit of the business, intensity helps you a lot. When you're in a global organization and processes and procedures and politics and external relations, you have to learn a whole new mindset. And if I'm honest about it, it was my first time as a FTSE CEO, and there was a huge learning curve to go through. Probably one of the greatest experiences of my life. But I think there's a lot to be said for people actually learning their way into these sorts of roles, and you just develop your own techniques hopefully with support from a lot of people around you.
And Rich, that journey to becoming the chief exec, was that just for everyone listening, was that a start from the ground and worked all your way up, or was that I was somebody somewhere else and was appointed into role?
Well, actually, the strange thing is that, one of my heroes in life was always Tom Hagen, the consigliere in The Godfather.
Yeah. And
I always thought that role of being the consigliere was the beautiful role, because you were close enough to the flame to feel its heat, but you never got shot at. And so I always saw myself very much more as sort of the Tom Hagen rather than the Corleone.
Okay.
So when you get put into that sort of leadership role, it was something that sort of happened, and then you fall in love with it. If you don't love that role, then you shouldn't be there. So it wasn't something that I ever sort of planned and then stepped in. I'd sold Sporting Index a couple of times. I was running Alinsky Partners. We do a lot of transformations for a lot of fascinating organizations, and very much out of the blue, got a call from the then chairman of Ladbrokes and said, your name's been put in the ring for this. I'd like to, a couple of people have called me. I think you're patently unsuited for the job, I can't understand why I want to meet you, but a couple of people have said you should meet, so I have to meet you as due process. So that was really encouraging and made me feel really comfortable.
Yeah, really up for the role. Yeah, really up for it.
Yeah, really. You were really wanted. You're patently unsuited and you've got no background to do this, but let's have coffee.
So how did you, out of interest, how did you find and how did you also manage the transition from being the, whatever you want to call it, the Hagen, as you said, or the the consultant or whatever, that's providing information, to actually then becoming the decision maker? Because they're two very different roles, and I don't know which one was more in your comfort zone, but how did you manage A, the transition, and then B, the responsibility of the imposter syndrome that came with it?
Yeah, well, with the number of failures I've had, Ollie, I think some would say I didn't manage it very well, but that's a separate thing. And again, going back to the sort of the slight schizophrenia about how you see yourself and how others see you. I had one mentor, a most incredible man, a guy called Michael Lockett, Sir Michael Lockett. And Mike always used to say, he said, "Richard, you're a young man in a terrible hurry." And you just sometimes wonder whether I saw myself as Tom Hagen. What do other people see you as? So maybe it wasn't that much of a transition for me to actually take that sort of leadership role. Where the biggest learnings were you captain teams at the highest level. You've got to let people have accountability, and you have to let people play their roles, and you have to define their roles incredibly clearly. Where I struggled really badly was, if someone wanted help, I had to try and do their role, help them with it, and do my role, and I suppose I was a meddler. I interfered. I wanted to know everything out of fear of dropping the ball. And I think learning to delegate and learning to give other people accountability and learning to really trust process was really quite difficult for me.
And you attribute that down to, I guess, what emotional cue is that? As you said, is that fear? Is that fear of what? Fear of failure? Fear of somebody? So how did that play out for you in terms of the role? In terms of your role as chief executive, where were you feeling the pressures from, if you like, coming onto you, and then how did you either manage those well or badly?
Yeah, the pressures are internal. There's the pressure, the external pressure, for me at least, was never as intense as the internal pressure. The fear of letting people down. I have it now with the family. I have it with friends. I have it with you go on a bike ride and you don't want to. You've got to be the one that helps the person up the hill. If you're normally, I'm the person last on the hill, so it doesn't make any difference. But so it's that internal fear of letting people down. That's where it comes from. It's not a crippling fear because it drives you intensely, but there's no external fear that's stronger than that. And that fear for me meant that I wanted to know absolutely everything. I wanted to be involved in absolutely everything, to support people, to be there for them, so that they never took the first punch. You always took the first punch for people because that's what a leader did. And actually, you learn over time that that's not what a leader does. That's perhaps what a leader of a smaller platoon does. But if you're commanding, you've got to let other people have the accountability to do it their way.
Yeah.
And it was that fear of letting people down that probably made me interfere, until enough people told me, Glynn, that's just not useful. If you want to get the best out of us, X, Y, and Z. And then you learn, and you take that as a learning, and you take deep breaths, and you process a new way of doing things.
Just out of interest, is that one of the biggest differences you notice from, if you like, private organizations or private equity, or whatever you want to call it, small private institutional businesses like Alinsky Partners, like Sporting Index, as opposed to a big FTSE listed business that actually, you coined it quite nicely, a leadership role, the leader and commander. I don't know, maybe private equity, leader, FTSE 100, FTSE listed business, commander. Like, is that a fair analogy? And how are they different?
Yeah, I think it's scale rather than nature of business, because of course some of the private equity businesses are global businesses, but certainly the scale, the command and control structure in a sort of a medium-sized business is such that you can put your arms around it, and passion and intensity and a voracious appetite for work. Those are the sorts of things that overcome an awful lot in that scale of business. Where you get into global organizations, operations in Spain, in Ireland, in Belgium, in America, you have to trust the process. You have to trust the instruments in front of you, and then you have to trust the people. And I think that is one of the biggest changes between running medium-sized businesses and running global businesses. A lot of running global businesses feels very much more about command structures and process. A lot of running the medium business is about intensity, passion, knowledge, and things like that. And I think it's very different techniques, and you have people who are superb at one, not very good at the other, and then you have people who can transfer seamlessly through.
And I mean, a massive word that I've heard a lot is trust, right? That you mentioned there. So my question is going to be around, how do you build that, for starters, right? And then equally, you mentioned, certain instances you were happy and certain instances you weren't. So where did it go wrong, if you like, from building that trust perspective? Like why couldn't you trust whatever? I'm not asking for specifics, but more sort of generally and philosophically, what were the blockages for you around the development and building of trust? And then equally, what does it look like and feel like in other success stories for you?
There was a fascinating story at Ladbrookes. After 2 or 3 years, we were at sort of a 9-10 year high on the stock price. And we always used, as a little management team, we used to go to a place in Dorset Square for breakfast. And we sat around, and the stock price was at this level, and it had triggered some options and all this sort of stuff. And you could feel everyone was quite excited. I remember sitting with the guys, and it was a very tightly knit group of people. And I remember saying to guys, why are we in this position? And everyone went, well, I said, what have we done differently that's really justified this share price? Yeah. And actually, the truth was that we'd done some really good actions, but the share price, there was a bit of hubris in it. And I remember saying to the team, come on, guys, let's be honest with each other. Let's be really honest. Are we this good? Yeah. And as a team, we all sat down and we said, no, we've got a lot more hard work to do. We can get even better, but we've got to refine things. We then had an absolute hideous year where we integrated the new Playtech digital platform from Microsoft, and we got caught between two big giants. And I made a big mistake in not telling the city, actually, it was going to take longer than it should. It was absolutely the right move. It was the basis for all the consolidation. Later, it fundamentally transformed the digital thing, and the share price came down, and I was personally getting probably a massively justifiable kicking, actually, probably a kicking that many people had wanted to give me. And we went back to that same breakfast place, and all the team were there, and people are quite sheepish when the boss is getting a public kicking. They don't know whether to put an arm around you or to sort of go to the toilet and giggle or whatever. And I remember sitting with them and saying, do you remember 9 months ago when we were here and we said we weren't that good? And it was, yeah, boss, I remember. I said, well, do you think we're this bad? Do you think we justify this now? And everyone said, no, we've done the right thing. We've done the deal. And I said, you're quite right. We're not this bad. We've just got to keep on working. And that was the best year we'd ever worked. And we went out to the city, and against the advice of everybody, I gave the city 5 KPIs and said, if any of these 5 KPIs with these timetables we don't hit, I will resign the following day. Yeah. And everyone said, you can't do that. You can't do that. But the boys trusted me to do it. The team was absolutely around it. A lot of the responsibility fell on them to deliver. And that's when you knew that you all trusted each other. And sometimes it's when you can really hunker down and you trust in everything that you've been doing, that you just know that you've built a really good team culture. And people always say to you, what was Ladbrookes like? And I say that year when we were getting kicked, everywhere there was another punch coming in, yeah, was the best year we'd ever had. We were closer as a team. We worked better. Actually, perversely, gallows humour was everywhere. You know, we laughed a huge amount, but it took a vast amount out of the team. But that's when we knew we'd built a really resilient culture.
So, I mean, what you're talking around there is pressure, basically. The pressure in terms of how it ultimately triggers a human response in us for the good or for the bad. You know, what in both senses. One, you said our year before our share price was absolutely flying. The second year, I don't know whether you made some bad decisions or whatever it was, right? But it wasn't flying. How did you, in your role as chief executive, feel? Did you actually, did you feel isolated? Do you feel sort of lonely at that period of time? And equally, I guess, what would you have done differently? I don't mean from like, decisions of like, are we going to go left, we're going to go right, but what would you have done differently from your own personal perspective in terms of managing that pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I felt all of those things. I felt like I'd let people down, and that's an intense pressure on people.
Did it change your decision making? Did you feel it changed anything in you in terms of that pressure, or you managed to stay consistent?
Well, I think that's again a really insightful question, Ollie. I think that's for others to judge. I don't think it changed my decision making. I hope and I believe, and I know business schools always say to you, "Oh, hope is not a strategy." Well, in hindsight, it might be. I hope that I still am very analytical. I hope that the decisions that we made were based on the evidence that we had at the right time. And I think we were entirely consistent during that time. I don't think it made me a very pleasant person to be around. I think I became quite insular. I think I made that typical mistake of people under pressure is you think that you can get out of pressure by doing another 40% work. And so, you just work even harder, whereas perhaps you didn't work smart enough. And what I would have done in hindsight, and after I left, I worked with a psychologist for a year to try and understand everything, which was absolutely fascinating. Worked on me to try and understand it. And what I realized I didn't do was I didn't explain things well enough to people around me, and I didn't actually allocate to the chairman, to the senior independent directors, to the non-executives, to the advisors. I didn't allocate sufficiently to them to say, this is the situation we're in, this is your responsibility. Now, what strategy are you going to come back to me with to help us stop this tailspin? Again, I tried to do everything. I tried to just take on all of the roles myself. And so clearly, despite all the wonderful words I said to you earlier, I simply hadn't learned by that period about that delegation and the accountability and letting others help me more.
Sure.
And in hindsight, you feel rather silly.
And what do you think, just out of interest, what do you think would have helped you at that point in time to sort of realize that, rather than having to basically go through the mill and come out the end of it and look back and go, oh, actually, if only I'd have done this and this? Like, you mentioned some of the board, you mentioned you saw a psychologist or a coach afterwards.
Yeah.
Do you think that would have benefit, like, I don't know, the role of a coach, or maybe that's the role of the board, I don't know, but if that had been more prevalent in your sort of at that point in time, do you think that would have helped, or do you think the pressure was so much it wouldn't have, you just went into robot mode?
No, I'm sure it would have helped. I'm sure in hindsight, had I had the strength of character to have probably asked for help more, it would have really benefited me. At the end of the day, the person sitting in the corner office has to take the accountability. I was in that corner office. No one put a gun to my head, and I take accountability for everything. But I didn't have the strength, I didn't have the experience to be able to ask the right people for the right advice. And I suspect actually people around me who were much more experienced could have said to me, hey, Glynny, I think you need to speak to X, or you need some help from Y. Whether I would have listened or not, that's for other people to judge. But I'm certain that, and one of the things that I work with a lot of teams on now is making sure that in difficult times you're getting as much help as you humanly can, so you can step back and you can make the right decisions.
You mentioned quite a valuable point in terms of listening, the art of listening. You mentioned it a couple of times already. Like, what does that look like, for you? If you're going to, now you sitting with the hindsight and benefit of hindsight and experience, what does good listening look like and feel like for an individual that is in a position of responsibility? And they're either flying or they're, and therefore you've got tailwinds or you've got massive headwinds and you're falling fast. Like, what does good listening look like at that point in time?
I try to explain this to people. Good listening is feeling. Sounds like a contradiction in terms, but good listening is feeling. It's making sure that you're actually tuning in with what somebody's really telling you rather than what they're saying. And if you can be emotionally open enough to try and feel what they really want to say, and then give them the space so that they can really say it in a very safe environment, then you can really listen intently. And listening is about not having a prior agenda. It's about literally going in there and forgetting what you know, but trying to tune in emotionally to what the person really wants to say. It's terribly difficult for people to actually express how they're feeling, what they want, for fear of offense, for fear of their jobs, because people aren't used to talking. And so I always say that really good listening is about feeling.
Okay, so there's so many things I want to ask in that question, right? But I'll try and ask the first one of that, right, which was around creating psychological safety, if you like, for whoever it is that you're going to be, consulting or speaking to or listening to. When the pressure's there, most people I find are, time poor, whether they're, life or their business, whatever, is flying, or they're, they've got massive headwinds, they're in the shit, and they're like, oh my God, like, where do we go? How I don't know whether you did or you didn't then, but like now, how do you think you can create that psychological safety for an individual when they're coming to talk to you, or when you're going to listen to them?
Yeah, there are three absolutely critical parts for me. The first one is the process. So they know that there is a period of time set aside for them. It's absolutely sacrosanct. It's not times when they're doing emails. It's not times when the phones are on. It's a period of time built in that is purely there for them. Then the feeling of safety is around 100% learning culture. That this doesn't guarantee you in any way that your job is safe. It doesn't guarantee you in any way that you will be a success. What it guarantees you is that we will work together to learn from this, which gives you the biggest chance. So whatever you say is open. Whatever you say, we will look at together in an environment of learning from it. There may be some hard lessons, but it's a learning environment. And then the third part is about making sure that you are listening with your emotions, that there's no agenda, that it's absolutely open, but you are really listening with your emotions and you are trying to find out what people really want to tell you. And if you can put those three things together, then you create an intensely safe environment for an individual or for a team to express how they feel. From that, you can then build a baseline for the process and procedures and rhythms by which you can learn and you can become high performance. But creating that safe space is the fundamental building block for listening.
I mean, it's brilliant. If I'm honest, I'm low, right? But so then, if I try and put that through your lens, and let's use the Ladbrookes one or whatever, you've had a disastrous year. You get
it wasn't that good, Ollie.
Okay, right. But you've from what you're telling me, it wasn't that good. You've got the pressure of the stock market, the pressure of the board, whatever it is. You're trying to find solutions. So how do you, in that environment, you create psychological safety and go into it with an open mind? And my question is actually stemming around, how do you remove your own personal bias and preference when pressure is on? Because it's easy when you've got time, but times against you, if you like, and you're trying to be relaxed and open and psychologically safe, but you're also trying to remove, I think we should go left. You're telling me to go right. How do I don't give that any credence or credibility. How do well, you might not know, but like, how would you, or how did you, or your learnings, whatever, how would you create that removal of emotional preference, bias, whatever else you want to call it?
I probably didn't do it for me. It's the old cobbler's shoes. In those days, the theory was great, but I probably didn't do it for me. If it's possible for the person who you're working with, the team that you're working with, to know that absolutely this is about learning and getting them to the right place, then it's much easier for people to come in, to take a step back and to say quite openly, my preference at the moment is for Y. Great. Now, talk me through, let's assume that actually we were going to do Z. Let's assume that Z was the decision. Let's talk about what the process for delivering Z would be. Let's talk about what the obstacles for delivering Z would be. Let's talk about why you should be advocating Z. And we create an environment in which we can compare and contrast the different approaches so that the individual can internalize and take an objective decision without having to worry that they're seen as, oh, but you said A, now I'm doing B, I look like I'm weak. Actually, no, you don't. You look like you're incredibly strong because you've made a fact-based decision. If you can create that safe space in which people know that they are working through the processes themselves, the obstacles, the direction, then they internalize the outcomes, and they can then really take those outcomes out to their teams. So it all comes back to the process by which you allow people to fail within that room, because failure there is just a learning process.
And so then what I'm hearing is also around your ability, if you like, to communicate that, if you like, the safe space to the individual that you're talking to, or to the teams that you're working with, whilst there's a whole load of pressure going on, or simultaneously multiple things happening, but also the pressure of the external, right? So a lot of the stuff we've sort of spoken around is actually how do you listen and manage the internal processes. What were your experiences of that external pressure, and how to manage that external pressure, and also communicating? I don't know, you thought you should go left, you've just had this brilliant, psychologically safe, removal of emotional bias meeting, and actually we're going to go right. So the whole game plan's changed. How does that work? How does that work from an external pressure, an external communications perspective?
Yeah, I suspect if you want to prod at a saw, you're just doing it now, Ollie. I mean, I don't think.
No. I'm sorry, Rich. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Yeah.
No. I don't suspect that I'm the world's greatest external communicator. Okay. I love that very personal one-to-one, but I'm not natural in public. I'm not a great one for profile or anything like that. So the newspapers and all that sort of stuff was an alien environment to me.
Okay.
And I don't think I was very good, if I'm honest about it, at communicating my passion and my direction to the people who then had to communicate it. So I don't think I made their lives very easy either.
Yep.
In hindsight, being and using professionals who are exceptionally good at communicating in those environments is critical, and I would have probably used the same people, but I would have been very different in them. Going back to the individual point is exactly the same. That if you can be honest, you can build a direction, you can communicate your direction clearly, fact-based, to the people around you, and they are all aligned behind that vision, then once you have alignment, you can build the process by which people deliver. And it's getting that alignment. What I didn't do was probably educate and communicate that alignment externally very well,
yeah.
which was probably mistake number 4,328, which led to an unholy demise. But that's just learning. It's all good learning, Ollie.
I want to pick up on the learning piece and the failing or whatever else. Like, how important, I guess, is failing in the process for you of developing and nurturing talent and ultimately success? Like, what sort of role does that play? And then equally, how do you champion it, if that makes sense? How do you champion failure? Because where do you draw the line, if you like?
Yeah, what I learned really early was, if you look at the airline industry, and you and I had a little chat about this yesterday, but if you look at the airline industry, there is only one goal in the airline industry, and that's safety, passenger safety. Mm-hmm. It's measured globally by the number of incidents there are that could endanger life. Anything from the smallest little bulb that goes out through to fatal crashes. And what the airline industry has done absolutely incredibly is they've created this 100% learning, 100% growth capability. So anything that happens on any airline globally is reported, and people learn from it, and then it's disseminated. Security for the industry is not a competitive sport. If we can learn in Singapore Airlines and we can pass that to Malaysian Airlines or whatever, we all share. So there's absolute alignment. There's a single goal, there's a single standard, and people aren't blaming you for it. What they're doing is they're saying, well, X and Y happened. How can we make sure that we take that standard of learning to the next level? Without those incidents, you would never go to the next level. And as an individual, no matter how painful it is to feel for yourself that you haven't achieved as much as you wanted to, I look back on my time at many businesses and think, gosh, what more could we have done? Even if we've sold them for a lot of money, what more could we have done? And genuinely being honest with yourself and saying, what did we do really well? Celebrating what we did really well, but also genuinely learning what we could do better, and then building them into the process. And if you can create that 100% learning process with the teams around you, then it is capable of aligning behind that common vision. None of that means that people aren't going to lose their jobs. None of that is soft. It's incredibly hard, because what it does is it says, with all that learning, then you know who's accountable, you know what outputs are there, you know the time scale that's got to be delivered. We'll train you as best we can, but if you still can't deliver, we'll find somebody who can. And that applies to me or anybody around. So it gives humanity that capability of being able to express themselves and be as good as they can. Some people are just better than other people. It's not by any means protectionist, but it really does allow people to express and fulfill themselves.
Do you think that's what's missing in the market at the moment? I mean, is that maybe that sort of standardized goal you said in the airline industry of safety? I don't know if there are if I could draw any other analogies of where that is, but in the gambling industry, for example, I don't think there's one sort of common purpose that everyone sort of strives towards, or common standard. And then equally on the on that sort of 100% learning culture environment, do you feel that that's ever present in the market at the moment, or do you think that's what's missing in the market at the moment?
I'm not clever enough to know what's missing in the market. What I do know is that there are a lot of brilliant businessmen out there who are trying to embed a real 100% learning and 100% growth culture into their businesses at the moment. I think that sometimes short-term results move against that. So if you have to deliver quarterly earnings results, then it's incredibly difficult. When things go badly, you don't have to look at football clubs this week when people are getting out of trouble and people like Pearson lose their jobs or whatever. And I think it's too easy sometimes for the short-term correction to mean that somebody loses their jobs. If Ferguson had been judged on his first 9 months of results, he wouldn't have been the manager that he was, because it had been turfed out. And 20 years later, he's still one of the greatest football managers, reputedly, that there ever is. Not that I know anything about football, Ollie, so I don't know why I'm talking about football.
But Rich, what dictates that then? Because obviously there are the pressures that you're talking around. I mean, they exist in the market today. Quarterly earnings results, or a month-long. You mentioned football, a year-long season that you either get promoted or relegated from. Yeah. So there are most of the construct, if you like, of the market, of the environments are short-term focused, right? You either you win or lose now, not in. And so in order to have that foresight and forward thinking, who ultimately decides that, or where do you think that comes from? Because developing 100% learning culture is not something you can do tomorrow. Maybe a quarterly earnings thing you can, you need to do tomorrow, if that makes sense.
Again, I think it's the absolute accountability of the CEO to explain what's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. It's nobody else's job. If I was to come to you and say the company's here now, the first year, 18 months, we're going to be training, we're going to be learning, don't expect great results. You'll see the trends move in years 2, 3, 4, and actually we'll be looking for really good results in year 5. Yeah. And if you believed in that strategy, and if I gave you stepping stones along the way that showed what we were doing, and if I communicated properly to you, you as a sensible investor who took a long-term view would say, wow, that's really clear. We know what we're doing. We make the decision as to whether we buy into that and we hold for 5 years, or we'll buy in 3 years' time when we'll take the risk on the share price being slightly higher, but we'll have got through that uncertain phase in the first instance. I do still believe that it's entirely the responsibility of the CEO to set the strategy, to explain it to people far better than I ever did.
Yeah.
And to give people those hooks by which they can be judged, and then to take the consequences. But I don't think there's anything contradictory in saying to people, this is the timescale, this is the investment, this is the culture. You please make a decision as to whether you buy that. Yeah, then people have to have the right to make their own investment decisions, and employees need to make their decision as to whether that's a business that they want to come to or they want to stay. And building that culture in the business is absolutely critical for delivery.
And just to caveat that, then, or ask a devil's advocate question: how difficult is it, or how do you make sure that you maintain the consistency if, when you announce all that stuff and you communicate all of that sort of dialogue and direction of travel, but actually the response is negative? Like, I don't know, investors don't put the money in, employees leave, and you're like, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting this. Like, how much do you stay true to that, or how do you know when to pivot, or how much do you bend to the wishes of those short-termists?
Yeah, and I think that's a really difficult conundrum that people face. Often people say that pivoting, which is this new wonderful business school term, we're pivoting. No, you're not. You're out of a job and you're going to business school to try and retrain. Anyhow, but I think listening to people who may know better than you and thinking it through and having the honesty to say, you know what, actually, I've reconsidered. This is now where we're going, is a very, very strong thing to do. If you pivot every 15 minutes, then actually nobody will trust your direction. If you genuinely believe what you said in the beginning, have looked at all the facts, having considered things objectively in a really safe environment and challenge yourself, and you genuinely believe that what you are recommending is the right thing and the thing that you would leave, then you have to be prepared to take the consequences. If the market or your shareholders, be it private equity or the family office you work for or whoever, if they don't agree with you and you believe that, then you have to take the consequences in life, and that's part of standing up for what you believe in.
And then I guess segueing into success or achievement, like, how do you, from all your experiences you've had, and I'm going to ask you about some of your highlights and lowlights of that overall after this one, but do you feel that your sort of definition of success has changed over time? You know, how do you know in those, what I'm getting at is when you're trying to create an environment of 100% learning, how can that's an objective perspective. I might think it's going really well. Somebody else might think it's going really badly. How do you actually sort of define and clarify what success is and what good looks like? And how do you monitor that as you go through?
Yeah, from an external perspective, you know, other people will define your success for you. For me, success is a strange thing. For me, success is contentment, is peace. So, you know, where I feel that I've really delivered, where I feel that the team are really performing well, where I believe that we've, as I said before, left nothing on the paddock, then I get a sense of peace. Yeah. And I can sit in the garden and I really feel that sense of peace.
So you feel you need in order to truly achieve it, you need a proper emotional engagement with the business.
Absolutely. Absolutely, with the team, with the business, and you know, even if that means you failed, you can still get that sense of peace if you believe that absolutely everything you did was as good as you could possibly do it. But you know, someone was just better than you. That, you know, that happens in life. There are people or teams or whatever who are just better than you. You can still get that sense of peace about, I really gave it everything. Now, what can I learn for the next cup final? So that to me is success. I tell you, the greatest business experience that ever happened to me was we'd sold one of the businesses. Once, and we'd sold it not bad. And we had one employee who, you know, he was known for being fantastically grumpy. You know, he used to say, he used to come into every meeting and he used to say, I've only got two moods. I'm either angry or silent. And he was, but he was bloody good at his job. And we'd sold the business and he came into my office and I thought, oh, fantastic. I'm going to see him smile. It's going to be that day. And he came into the office the week after we'd sold the business and we were all still working in it. And he ripped a strip off me. This isn't right. That's not right. This is terrible. That's not terrible. I thought, oh my God, you know, what do I have to do? And as he was walking out of the room, he turned around to me and he said, and by the way, he said, today I paid off all the debt on my home and that's secured my family. Thank you. And that to me was everything. That was just everything. That somebody just said, thank you, we did it. He said, we did it. Today I paid off all it. And you don't need anything more than that. That was still the most memorable thing that's happened to me.
And Rich, how do you then, it's really interesting that sort of analogy, because you get those type of people, right, in organizations. How do you, as the leader of the group or the chief exec or whatever, differentiate between actually the value that they bring and the impact that they might have on the group? Because there's been lots of like victim elders in the world that, like, you know, even when they win the lottery, it's the worst thing in the world, right? So how do you sort of ascertain between them that could be a massive emotional drain on the business, but they're very, very competent and good at their job, as opposed to somebody that's brings energy and the impact that they might have on the group?
Yeah, and that was a really important point there, because in this case we had to openly, as a team, address exactly this cultural issue, which was understanding between us our own personalities, what we brought from a business point of view, but also the impact we had on each other. And we had environments where literally built into the process, people would be able to say, well, Mr. X, you know, Jesus, you've been a pain up the arse this week, and I did this for you and you didn't do this. So next time, would you mind doing this? And the individual in question saying, yes, I acknowledge that. Actually, that was wrong of me. But then people also saying, but actually that bit of work that you did was phenomenal. And it was about building a culture so that his own personality didn't become corrosive. It almost became quirky. It was something that the team actually joked about and revered because we knew the value he brought, rather than it becoming corrosive. And you have to stop that individualism being corrosive, because then the individual defeats the sum of the parts. And it was about creating that safe space in which we could all talk to each other as equals and actually create it as a cultural mix. But it is a really difficult thing when you have somebody whose personality can impact adversely on the rest of the team. And you must have seen this 100 times on a rugby field.
Yeah, I mean that's why I'm asking is you get those individuals that are very morose and fairly morbid on their approach, and sometimes they add bizarrely they add a bit of value to the group, and other times they can totally sap the life out of the group. And I'm just intrigued to know how you sort of managed all those. So that's a sort of great insight.
And the opposite is also true. You have the individual who is hail fellow, well met, is always joking, is always pranking, but actually doesn't realise sometimes that he goes too far or she goes too far. And it's without pulling the exuberance out of them, is making them realise that actually other people's emotions and sensitivities may be a little bit more heightened than theirs. So it's not necessarily always Victor Meldrew. It may be the person at the other end of the spectrum as well.
So let's sort of build on this part a little bit more, if you're right for it, which is obviously around the culture of your organisation that you're building, and the various different people that make up the collective jigsaw puzzle of the organisation. Well-being, we're hearing more and more and more and more now in the workspace. And what does that mean to you? And what should it mean to an organisation? That term.
I mean, well-being, it's a fascinating term, because if you say somebody's physical well-being, everyone says, oh, that's great, they're keeping themselves fit. If you say mental well-being, people actually talk about it as a negative. They say, oh, mental well-being, well, are they anxious? But actually, mental well-being is exactly the same as your physical well-being. You've got to work on it every single day, and it is a fundamental part of who you are and how you can perform. I remember as a kid watching all these sort of kung fu masters, being in awe of these tiny little men being able to smash bricks and things. And you think, how can they do that? And of course, half of it's training and half of it's mentality. And the power of the mind is so incredible that for people to think that your mental well-being is any less important than your physical well-being, or that you should just bottle it up, is madness, absolute madness. And this has always been something that's fascinated me. And I think I remember telling you that this all started at Great Ormond Street for me 15 years ago, where the surgeons there, who are geniuses, invested in the mental well-being of the staff, the parents, the kids, because they knew that if the mental well-being was strong and resilient, the kids would get better quicker, and they would make more money out of it because they treat more kids. And you suddenly realize as a businessman that this is the holy grail in life. If you can genuinely invest in your people, care for your people, you can nurture your people, give them mental resilience so that they then can put that into their families and society, but also so that they can bring that mental resilience into the workplace. Less absenteeism, less turnover, higher productivity, higher presenteeism, more engagement. Why would anyone work anywhere else where people invest less in them? So you as a business can make hard profits out of something, higher productivity, by investing in the well-being of your people and indirectly society. I mean, that has to be the holy grail for any businessman. And that's how it all started.
Yeah, I think where people, and therefore probably businesses, struggle, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on this, but also see the value is on the physical well-being side of things. It's a lot easier to quantify and to visibly see. If you like, for example, if I go from looking like a couch potato to suddenly I can actually, I'm still waiting for the day, but I can see a six-pack, or I can or my 5K time comes down by 2 minutes, or whatever else it is. Like, you physically see the progress, and it's tangible. Yeah. The mental well-being side of it, I think, is a lot harder to quantify, to provide data. And so my question to you is sort of, how have you found in your experiences to date that you've been able to demonstrate that value, that data, I guess that progress, and equally, how much longer does it take? The physical side, I mean, I know I'm got fitter in a month, if that makes sense, whereas I don't know if I can know that from a mental side.
There was a guy called Drucker who said in the 70s, if you can measure it, you can improve it.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. The difficulty with mental well-being was nobody spoke about it, stigmatized, but there was nothing tangible around it. So we set out to create the 10,000 steps, the 5 a day of mental well-being, which is the index that we've created on 87%. And it takes 7 dimensions, 35 sub-dimensions of you, of everything that makes up your mental well-being. It's scientifically reviewed and all this sort of stuff, so that you can see what they call a trait and a state score. You can see a baseline, and then there's a learned algorithm behind it, which looks at questions you answer every time you engage with the platform, the programs you do, the tips, the tricks, the readings when you're not on the app. And it works with you every single day to refine your score, and then to signpost you to areas where you could perhaps focus more, and then to signpost you again to third-party interventions that could help you if you need them. And it personalizes around you. So it creates a tangibility around your scoring. It's not a competitive scoring, which helps you to be able to say, gosh, wow, I've engaged with this for 3 months now, and my anxiety scores have gone up by 17%. And these are the sorts of success rates that we're seeing now, because we have sufficient people using the app to be able to get scoring results out of it. And we're seeing that in 3 or 4 months now, even during COVID, that people who are engaging with the app against a peer group of people who are not engaging with the app are evidencing raises in their anxiety, well-being, resilience scores of between 17 and 20%. So suddenly you're giving them a tangible measure. But if you can give the individuals a tangible measure, by aggregating it and consolidating it, maintaining the confidentiality, you can also give the hosts a measure. Yeah. It's almost like a diagnostic for the organization, for the team. You can say, these are the 3 or 4 thematics that the team are exhibiting. They really need to focus on more, which allows you then to build a program to be able to invest behind that and continue working on areas. So the individual says, blimey, the company's listened to me. The company's hearing what I'm saying without ever having to make me disclose and diagnose personally, which makes me feel uncomfortable. And now they're investing in me. That's incredible. Wow, I get conferred gratitude to the business. The business is doing the right thing. The business reinforces all of the things that I'm doing as an individual. And you get into this incredible virtuous cycle of investing in well-being, which leads to productivity benefits and gains. And so by making it tangible, measurable, personable and engaging, you get people to engage with it. They give you the data, and you then use the data to measure, but it's a longitudinal data study. You mentioned the time, Ollie. You did a month and you got fit, but if you sit eating chips for 2 months, you'll get unfit.
Yeah.
Mental well-being is exactly the same. You can really focus on things and you'll find that actually your engagement will increase. Mental well-being is about resilience. It's about doing it daily, engaging with your mental well-being and knowing that it's a fundamental part of your armory for when something bad may happen, when something good may happen. You know, tomorrow you may lose your job. Tomorrow somebody may get diagnosed as being ill. Yeah. You have to have the resilience to be able to cope with that. And that means focusing on your mental well-being every single day to some extent. And
this is what you're now as chairman of this organization, 87%, which is all around delivering against all of those things that you've just mentioned. So just as an interesting question around that, obviously the world of physical health, the organizations and individuals are fairly well educated around the benefits of that, right? How advanced or how far down the line do you think society is, organizations are around the education of the benefits of this, and where do you think we need to do more?
It's actually the pivotal point, I think, for mental well-being now, and COVID has been a catalyst for it. There's a fundamental change now in organizations to appreciate that mental well-being is a fundamental part of the employee who's in the organization. And in fact, OC&C did a report that was exhibiting a few factors around organizations which will succeed coming out of COVID. And one of the aspects that they said about leadership was that they would have to exhibit kindness. Successful organizations would have to exhibit kindness. They didn't mean holding birthday parties with cakes and candles. What they meant was kindness to the workplace, understanding actually the well-being requirements in the workplace. And those organizations that did this would be the winners, would be the sustainable, authentic organizations coming out of the workplace. I think it's going to take another 10 years before actually mental well-being is as embedded into the workplace as physical well-being has been over the last 30 or so years. But there's no doubt about it. It's a fundamental change. There's some incredible people out there now as advocates for mental well-being, and a lot of the big organizations and some of the family organizations know that this is just so important for delivering productivity and also for delivering a sustainable society. Business has got a really important role to play in society, especially now when governments are borrowing so much money. You know, we have to go back to that old philanthropic capital ideas of the 1800s, where business has to invest in society.
And this is, you just coined at the end, but this is your, well, not your, but the interpretation of philanthropic capitalism. Now, you think that that is the organizations that are going to succeed and thrive in the future have to have this philanthropic side to the you know, well, rather than me putting words in your mouth, you know, it's something you've told me a lot about, that you call it the holy grail, if you like. What is this philanthropic capitalism, and how is it a differentiator for organizations moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing that I've invented. It's not new. I'm not clever. But if you go back to the 1800s, you know, I merely have to say a list of names to you, Ollie, and you'll know them all: the Guggenheims, the Cadburys, the Bournevilles, the Salts, the Carnegies. I mean, these were people who knew that by investing, you know, Marks and Spencer's, some of the first people, the Seifs, to do pedicure and manicure in the Penny Bazaar in Leeds for their staff, because they knew that when the women came in to sell, if their hair was done well and their nails were done and their pedicures, they're on their feet all day, the women felt better about themselves. Why would they go to another organization? But they sold more. And these businesses created dynastic wealth, yeah? But they created dynastic wealth out of doing good. Most of them had religious imperatives, which we don't probably have as much nowadays. But there's a much bigger imperative for business than just making profit. If you invest in your people, the people are more productive, the people are more resilient, the societies are more resilient, you actually will make more profits. You as a business decide what you do with that profit. You can either give it away to charity, as Carnegie said that he would do. You can give it to your shareholders. You can give some back to the staff. You can invest more in your staff. But the fact is that philanthropic capitalism, now as I define it, which is investing in the mental well-being of your workplace, is something that delivers hard, tangible business results. It's a duty of business to take up there and invest in its own people so that its people can invest into their families. There's something far more important about business than just making profit.
And do you think that private capital, institutional capital, you know, the markets, if you like, are waking up to that? Do you think, you know, people are voting with their pound notes or, you know, dollars or whatever else towards organizations that are delivering against that? So it's not all about, you know, if you like, the quarterly returns now. Do you think that's happened? And do you think that if that has happened, do you think that's because of COVID, or do you just think COVID's expedited that whole process?
I think COVID's a catalyst. You know, if you look at the ESG investment movements, I think that they're starting to say there's more than just profit. But philanthropic capitalism, the way I define it, which is investing in the well-being of our people, will deliver greater profitability. So actually, it's hard business investment sense. You know, Deloitte did a report, the Deloitte Monitor report, that showed a 4.2 times return on investment in preventative well-being. Preventative, proactive well-being, 4.2 times ROI. Well, most private equity want 3 times cash. Yeah, so you're ahead of that benchmark. So this is hard business sense. Investors will see that investing in the well-being of their people delivers higher productivity, and over time, what will happen is you'll create, as 87% is starting to do, indexes and benchmarks that show comparative returns based on well-being, why would somebody invest in a business with a lower well-being investment index than a higher one?
So Richard, just so if the hard business sense is so obvious and so evident, why isn't it commonplace everywhere? Like what are you finding, or what have you found are the reasons that people aren't doing it for whatever reason? The bad businesses maybe, but why are they not doing it?
It's really simple. It's exactly what you said before, Ollie. You understood it perfectly. It's because the data isn't there yet, which shows the correlation between the investment in the well-being and the increased engagement, the increased productivity, the decrease in turnover. And we've got some clients at 87% who are building this correlation now, particularly around decrease in absenteeism, where the factor stated is because their mental well-being is better. So they can then quantify that by saying X days reduction in absenteeism equals Y increase in productivity minus the cost of the investment gives you a return of A. And as soon as businesses start to quantify it, you'll get this avalanche of people saying, blimey, we must start actually not only investing in well-being, but correlating it with the other HR metrics. You're a director of one of the big four. You understand the way that the accountancy firms correlate the data, HR with financial data. The data on well-being hasn't been available yet because there hasn't been the 87% of the world to give them that raw data back from the employees. Once they start doing the correlation, I think it's inevitable that people will start saying, gosh, this makes hard business sense.
And so, Rich, I guess looking on the forward for Richard Glynn, like what's the purpose, or what's the legacy that you want to leave behind? I don't know if you're into legacy or not, but like what's the, if you were to look back, lying on your deathbed and be like, okay, I've done what I set out to do. Like what is that purpose? What is that legacy? And has it been consistent all the way through? Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't.
You know what? I always believe that other people create your legacies for you. So for me, it just goes back to contentment. If I can look back and I can say, I've had some absolute kickings, I've made some absolute mistakes, I've had a few little successes, I've met some of the most fascinating people, I've continued to learn till the day I die, I've continued to be interested in people, in teams, in getting better till the day I die. Then hopefully if I'm sitting in the garden and I pop my clogs and I feel at peace there because I've done all those things, to me that's the only legacy. All the rest of it is very nice for people who like to create legacies and things like that, but for me it's about that real contentment.
Do you mind, it's probably an odd sort of diversion from me, but is there ever been a time where you haven't had that, where you felt you haven't stayed true to that virtue or that value of contentment, like where you've looked back at the scenario and be like, oh God, why I'm not content here? I feel frustrated, I feel annoyed, whatever it is, right? And what was the root of that? What did you do that wasn't true or consistent? Because I imagine lots of people listening be like, how do I get this contentment? Like, A, how do I get it? Or B, what does it look like? What does it feel like? And sometimes people relate more to when they've ballsed it up.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I've got it yet, but I'm still working hard to get it. Okay. I'll tell you a really, really embarrassing story. A really embarrassing story. And I realised that actually I'd got it fundamentally wrong. So I'd sold a business with a remarkable man early on, and I'd sort of got some for me very nice, but crumbs off the sort of the economic table there, and there's no doubts about it that I was quite young, and there was this sort of hubris that came in there, and I dashed out and I bought myself a very, very smart motor car, yeah, and it was a very exciting car. Well, there's only two problems, Ollie, which is one, I am the worst driver that you have ever seen. I mean, I am appalling.
I thought you were going to say there was one problem, I didn't have a driving license.
No, I did have a driving license, but I didn't use it. I am a terrible driver. I mean, a really bad driver. People who know me know now, I hardly ever drive anywhere. And the second thing is that I, as I say, I have this imposter syndrome. So when you're sitting in a smart car, you believe that people are looking at you. Well, for some people, they may like that. For me, this just made the driving even worse, even worse. And I took this car out, and I lived in the middle of Belsize Park at the time, where there was no garage or anything like that. The curbs are 6 foot high. I took this car out, and within the first day, I'd driven it into the curb, and I gouged the side of the car. About 2 days later, I must have stayed for 40 minutes at a junction while people refused to let me out, because I must have looked like such a cock in this car that people just did not let me out. About a week later, I suddenly realized, this is pathetic. This is just really destroying it. And I took an 86% loss in, I think, a month and a half on that car. That was when I realized that actually I didn't have the contentment. The hubris had overtaken everything. And I still use it as a way of saying, God, how embarrassing.
Oh, awesome.
It's just appalling. And so if I can use things like that to say, look, it's all very nice, but I ride a 3-wheeler scooter now, because that's about the only thing that I'm capable of keeping on the road, and I'm sort of safe on. And so, that sort of continual learning about challenging yourself and just looking at yourself in a mirror and saying, is that going to make me feel good, or am I doing that for reasons that actually are not about me? I hope one day that I'll be able to look in the mirror and say, well done, actually, you're not far away from it now. You're close enough to feeling almost content. I'm not there yet, but there's been plenty of those car moments when I've realized, my God, I've just completely lost it.
Mate, the search continues. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Richard, I could sit here and talk for hours. There's about a million other questions in my brain that I'd like to ask, but I'm conscious of letting you go for the day. I cannot thank you enough. It's been absolutely brilliant to have you on the show. I am positive that a lot of the listeners are going to take a huge amount from this. And if they do want to get in touch with you or hear it or get involved with any of the organisations that you're now involved with, how do they do that, Rich?
Look, all the sort of the normal LinkedIn, Richard Glynn, rg@alinskypartners.com, or most importantly, what I'd love people to do is come on board with this Philanthropic Capitalism. Come on board, get your organisation to invest in its people, and we can give you the platform, 87%. Come on there, get the platform, and we'll work together to create this investment in human capital, which really I think is the essence of the next generation of entrepreneurs in Britain, who will get us out of this crisis that we're in now by business playing its role. And Ollie, listen, you are the most charming of hosts. You are.
I don't know about that, Rich.
And it's really grateful for you allowing me to be so egotistical and talk about myself for a few minutes. So listen, we'll get that nice cold one, and we'll continue this very soon.
I look forward to it, matey. Thank you ever so much again.
All right, pal. Take care.